Today I'm taking a challenge where I'm going to lay out my favorite film or films from every year of my life. So let's rock this. Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Fuzz. So I noticed a bit of a challenge going around the BlueTube community these days, and I thought it would be a fun one to participate in. And I don't even know if I'd call it a challenge as much as an exercise, really. And the idea is to pick your favorite film from each year of your life, starting with your birth year and going all the way to the present. I watched a few videos from other collectors out there doing the same thing, and it got me to thinking, I wonder what my list would look like. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. I'm going to be starting from the year 1970, my birth year, and going all the way to 2022. However, I am going to be making one little tweak to the formula here, and that is with regard to honorable mentions. When I sat down to make my list, I found some years to be fairly challenging. Other years, there was a clear front runner. I was able to choose, my favorite from the year with no problem at all. But there are some years that I was really torn between like 2 or 3 different choices. And it didn't seem right to not mention those other choices as well. So for those years, I will be not only listing my favorite choice of the year, but I will also mention 1 or 2 other honorable mentions that were impactful to me. I mean, we're talking about the films that have meant the most to me over the course of my life, right? So it didn't seem right to not at least mention any runner-ups from a given year. What I really like about this exercise is the personalized nature of this list. The fact that it's specific to me and my life and the films that have resonated the most with me and made the biggest impact in my life, right? So I figured this would be a good way for you guys to get to know me a little bit better. This is still a fairly new YouTube channel, at least as of this recording, and what better way to get to know someone than by learning about the movies that have spoke to them the most. I am going to try and breeze through these pretty quickly. I don't want to spend too much time on any one title. I figure you guys are mostly here just to see what I chose, not necessarily to hear me ramble on and on about any given title. So I'm going to try to keep it as concise as I can, especially considering the sheer volume of titles I have here to talk about. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. So starting off with 1970, my birth year, I chose Dario Argento's The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. His first film as director, the film that really started it all for the maestro. And what can you say about Dario Argento? I mean, he set a new standard for giallo, for Italian horror. He's been hugely influential, so yeah, I had to do it. Pick his first film for my first film as well. Moving on to 1971, I chose Dirty Harry, the first Dirty Harry film. I love Clint Eastwood, and the Dirty Harry films are my favorite of all of his films. Just love these films. So yeah, the first one came out in 1971, and I think it made a pretty big impact. It wasn't politically correct or anything like that, and I think it resonated with a lot of people. So it certainly did with me. So yeah, Dirty Harry from 1971. 1972. Could you really pick any other film other than The Godfather for 1972? Seriously, I mean, I'm sure there are people out there who don't like The Godfather, who are not into these films as much, but I mean, The Godfather was a giant, hugely influential film. This film is a big deal, and, I would be lying if I said it didn't have an impact on me as well. So that's 1972. For 1973, we get into my first deal where I was kind of torn between a few titles here. And that is, I chose for 1973, The Exorcist, one of the greatest horror movies of all time, of course. So it's a great film. I'm not going to say a whole lot about it. There's not much that needs to be said. I do want to mention some honorable mentions for this year, because I had a hard time with this year. The Exorcist is my choice, but Magnum Force, another Dirty Harry film, I have always loved that film. It's one of my favorite Dirty Harry films, and I had to choose it. So Magnum Force is one honorable mention. The other honorable mention from that year, I'm going to mention The Sting. I have always loved this film. Me and Robert Redford go way back. Not personally, but I've been a fan for a long time, is what I mean. And this is like one of the greatest long con type films ever made. So yeah, The Sting is a good honorable mention. Moving on to 1974, we've got, of course, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That really was the only choice for me for this year. You know, there were no other titles that I was struggling with during this year. Moving on to 1975, we've got 3 Days of the Condor. Like I said, I'm a big Robert Redford fan, and this is probably my favorite Robert Redford movie out of all of them. So I have always loved 3 Days of the Condor. Not All the President's Men, 3 Days of the Condor here. So I do have an honorable mention for 1975, and that is Deep Red, of course, Dario Argento, uh, iconic film in my book. So yeah, Deep Red. Moving on to 1976, I chose Carrie. Now, pardon the reflection, I didn't feel like taking my protective covers off of any of these steelbooks or anything that has them on them. So if you get any reflection there, bear with me. I do love Carrie. It's Brian De Palma. It's an awesome film. I did have one honorable mention for that year, and that is John Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13. Really, really good film, and just, powerful film too. Okay, 1977. What do you think it's going to be? I mean, you have to know there's only one thing it could be, right? For 1977? For me, it was Star Wars. And yes, I still call it Star Wars, not A New Hope, because that's what it used to be called when it first came out. I saw this in the theater when it first came out, and it was a game changer for me. I mean, just blew my mind at the time. And I'm glad that I have those memories of seeing these original films in the theater when they first came out, because it was a big deal at the time. It was magical. So yeah, I couldn't not pick Star Wars. However, I do have an honorable mention for 1977, and that is my favorite Steven Spielberg film of all time, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I absolutely love this film, so I had to at least mention it, even though, Star Wars obviously deserves the top spot for 77, right? Okay, moving on to 1978. I had to do it again. Another film, Superman, the original from 1978. No, I don't have the 4Ks yet. I'm working on that. At some point, I do plan to pick up the 4Ks of all these Christopher Reeve films. But seeing that first Christopher Reeve film in the theater when I was a kid was huge. You got to understand, we didn't have live action superhero movies back then. We had some television shows and I think a made for TV movie or so. But Superman 78 was the first big budget, like live action superhero motion picture. And seeing Superman fly, seeing it all for the first time as a kid in the theater, it was just, I was in awe over what I was seeing transpire on the screen. We'd never seen anything like that. So yeah, Superman 78 is a big deal. The only problem with 1978 is I had to choose, right? And I can't not choose Dawn of the Dead as an honorable mention for 1978. I mean, George Romero, you got to do it, right? This was a hard choice for me. This was a really hard choice this year. And also, another favorite director of mine, John Carpenter, I gotta do an honorable mention for Halloween. Also, 1978, right? So this was a tough year for me. It was tough to pick just one, but ultimately I settled on Superman. Okay, moving on to 1979, of course, one of my all-time favorite films. This is in my top 5 of all-time favorite films. So I had to choose it. Alien, Ridley Scott. This is one of those films that I never get tired of watching. It's super rewatchable, and it's a classic, right? What can you say about Alien? However, again, 1979, this was a tough year for me because I'm also a huge Phantasm fan. So I have to obviously do an honorable mention for Phantasm as well, which I love. And it also wouldn't be right for me to not at least mention this film in 1979, Escape from Alcatraz, a little more squint with Clint. I love Clint Eastwood, like I said. And this is probably the film I've seen the most amount of times of his. This was one of those things that was always playing on cable or always playing on some channel or another, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen this film. I never get tired of it. And by the way, the 4K from Kino Lorber just looks awesome. So yeah, I had to at least mention Escape from Alcatraz. Okay, moving on to 1980. Once again, I had to choose a Star Wars film, The Empire Strikes Back. I don't see how you can choose anything other than this film for this year, unless you're just not a fan of sci-fi or Star Wars. But of course, The Empire Strikes Back in all its greatness was going to make my top film for the year. But again, we got another tricky year here. Some great films that are important to me, came out during that year. One such film is, of course, The Fog. This is actually one of my favorite John Carpenter films. It beats out a lot of the other ones that you think might beat it out. But for me, this is my favorite John Carpenter film. So yeah, The Fog, honorable mention. And another honorable mention, The Shining, of course, Stanley Kubrick. Brilliant film. What can you really say about a classic like this, right? So yeah, that's an honorable mention as well. Moving on to 1981, I had to choose Brian De Palma's Blowout. You can't go wrong with a little Travolta and a little Brian De Palma, a little Nancy Allen, who I love. This is just a great film, right? But again, 1981 was a tough year because that's also the year that Escape from New York came out. Sorry for the reflection once again on my covers here. But, I love this film. Like I said, I'm a big John Carpenter fan, so I had to at least mention it. But Blowout gets the spot for the year. Okay, moving on to 1982. Ooh, that's a big year. I'm surprised I didn't have more honorable mentions than I did for this year. The Thing, of course, right? I mean, how do you pick any other film other than The Thing for 1982? This is, wow. Well, I shouldn't say that actually, because the other honorable mentions are also, I wouldn't fault anybody for picking the other two as well. My honorable mentions for 1982 would be First Blood, of course, right? Another classic. And Blade Runner, right? This was a tough year. I mean, The Thing was an easy choice for me, but man, I love these other movies as well. And so it was tough. It was tough. Okay, 1983, I chose Scarface. This was an easy one for me. Another De Palma film. Had to do it, right? Another classic. My honorable mention for 83 would be War Games. Another film I saw in the theaters when it first came out, and it's just a very personal, nostalgic film for me. So yeah, War Games as an honorable mention. Okay, now we are getting into 1984, another really big year for me. Of course, I had to choose Terminator. So any title that's also one of my all-time favorite movies in general was going to make the pick for the top pick of the year. Another one I saw in the theater when it first came out, and this one made a big impact on me when I saw it in the theater. My dad took me to see it. It was like the first time I ever got to see a rated R movie with my dad in the theater. So it was a big deal, right? And of course, this movie just blew me away when I saw it. It's a very big movie for me. So yeah, one of my all-time favorite movies in general. So you knew it had to make this list for the year. Also, some honorable mentions. I do need to mention The Natural, right? This was a big movie for me as well. I mentioned I'm a big Robert Redford fan. Saw this movie at a drive-in theater with my folks. So yeah, I got a lot of memories, a lot of nostalgia for this stuff, right? And I'm not even a big sports fan. In fact, I'm not a sports fan at all. I don't like sports. But to the extent that I can handle sports, baseball is my favorite. And even though I'm not a big sports fan, this movie has always meant a lot to me. In spite of that, it's just a really good baseball movie. And it's a special story. So yeah, I had to at least mention The Natural as an honorable. I also want to briefly mention as an honorable mention Once Upon a Time in America. This is such a great film. And I would love to see this get a 4K release someday. So this is another one that has stuck with me for many, many years. Okay, moving on to 1985. Dario Argento again. One of my favorite Argento films, Phenomena. I love this film. And this 4K, of course, looks amazing. So yeah, that was it. 1985 was easy. This was my only choice for 1985. Moving on to 1986, another all-time favorite film. So it had to be the top one for the year, and that is Aliens, of course. James Cameron making an appearance on this list once again. Of course, one of my all-time favorite directors too. So some days this movie is my all-time favorite film. So yeah, Aliens, 1986. No honorable mentions for 86. 1987. Let's talk about RoboCop. Yeah, another classic. That I mean, I don't know how much you can really say about this movie. It's a great film. Paul Verhoeven doing his thing, and kind of satirical. It's just a great film, and this is my choice for 1987. However, there is another film that came out in '87 that has always been a big one for me, and that is Wall Street. Michael Douglas. I have a little two-pack here with Wall Street and the sequel. But I've always loved Wall Street. It's got some classic moments in it. So that's my honorable mention for 87. 1988, another one of those years where there was one clear frontrunner, one clear choice for me, and that is, of course, Die Hard. One of the greatest action movies of all time. One of the greatest Christmas movies of all time. Controversial. Let's see here. But yeah, Die Hard. That was a big one, right? 1989. Another big year for me personally as a James Cameron fan, and that is because of The Abyss. This is a bootleg Blu-ray I have of the special edition. Boy, I can't wait for this thing to come out on 4K. We desperately need it. But yeah, The Abyss is a big one for me. 1989. And I do have an honorable mention for 1989, and that is Say Anything from Cameron Crowe. A little bit outside of the horror action thing that I usually go for, but I've always been a big fan of Cameron Crowe movies. I like his kind of slice of life approach, and this one is just a classic. So many great classic moments from this, so many quotable moments from this film. So yeah, that's my honorable mention for 1989, and that about wraps it up for the 80s. By the way, if you're enjoying the content here, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell so you can be alerted anytime I post some cool videos that you might be interested in. I really appreciate your support, so thanks a lot. Okay, now moving on to the 90s. A funny thing about this, just as a quick side note, I noticed when I was doing this list, I seem to have the most honorable mentions in the 80s and in the 90s. Those are where I had the hardest time choosing a single film for each year. So I'm looking at my stack here, and I can see that there's probably quite a few honorable mentions coming up in this next decade. So starting off with 1990, Total Recall, of course. You can't go wrong with Total Recall. A little Arnold, right? Paul Verhoeven again, great director. So yeah, Total Recall for 1990. But I do have an honorable mention, and that is The Hunt for Red October. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I think it's one of the greatest submarine movies of all time, right there up there with Crimson Tide. So I never get sick of watching that. So I had to at least mention it since I've seen it a million times. 1991, this is another one of those deals where can there really be any other choice but Terminator 2, right? And yeah, I know the 4K looks like crap, but man, it's still a great film and it's a classic, right? Another one of those films I saw in the theater when it first came out and was just blown away the first time I saw this. I can remember the palpable excitement that I felt watching this the first time in the theaters. It was just a blast. So yeah, Terminator 2. That said, I do have an honorable mention for 1991. Of course, it was always going to be Terminator 2 for 1991, but I'd be remiss if I didn't at least mention Point Break, right? Sorry, I got a triple pack here, but Point Break is what I'm referring to as an honorable mention here. Just another classic, Keanu Reeves, Patrick Swayze. So that's what I went with for 91. For 1992, there's only one choice. It was pretty clear for me, and that was Al Pacino's Scent of a Woman. I've always loved this film. That final dialogue at the very end of the movie where Al Pacino goes off is just awesome. And I never get tired of seeing that. It gives me goosebumps every time I hear him make that speech. So, yeah, Scent of a Woman for 1992. 1993, another probably seemingly obvious choice, and that would be Jurassic Park. Spielberg, right? The first Jurassic Park movie is, of course, a classic, and I mean, who wouldn't pick that, right? Although, I've got to do some honorable mentions here because that happens to be the same year that Tony Scott did True Romance with Quentin Tarantino, right? So, tough call. Even though Jurassic Park seems like the clear lead, I love this film, and so there was no way I was going to not mention this one. Another great honorable mention for 1993 would be Michael Douglas's Falling Down. Really, really good movie. And another one I saw in the theater when it first came out, made an impact on me. It was it's a good drama. I remember the marketing campaign for this one was a little odd. They tried to kind of market it as a comedy, but it's really a drama and just an excellent, excellent film. Okay, moving on to 1994, I chose Speed, of course. Keanu Reeves, another one I saw in the theater. It's just, great memories with all these films, seeing all these films for the first time in the theater. So, and of course, this is the film that made me fall in love with Sandra Bullock. I'd never really seen her in anything prior to this. So, yeah, I remember that very, very clearly. And I definitely had the hots for Sandra Bullock like we all did back then when we first saw this in the theater. So, a great, great film. That said, there are a couple other honorable mentions for 1994. I have to mention Pulp Fiction, of course. It was a tough call on 94. I mean, Speed was definitely going to always be my top of the list, but man, this is an important film too, as is Shawshank Redemption, right? All of these films I saw in the theater. Actually, I didn't see Pulp Fiction in the theater, but I did see this one in the theater, and I saw Speed, of course. So yeah, those are my honorable mentions for 1994. Moving on to 1995, another all-time favorite film, and that is Heat. Again, sorry about the reflection, guys. I'm not going to let that stay on there too long. It's too hard to see with the dark cover and the plastic covering I have. So yeah, Heat, 1995, the greatest heist flick, cops and robbers flick of all time. But I do have a couple honorable mentions with that. One of them is Die Hard with a Vengeance. I love Die Hard with a Vengeance. The third Die Hard film, and the only other Die Hard film that was actually directed by the original director, John McTiernan. So that's part of why I love it so much and why I included it as an honorable mention. And of course, Crimson Tide, as I've talked about before, that's going to be my other honorable mention for the year. Man, it sucks when all these great movies come out the same year. It makes this kind of list very difficult. But that's an honorable mention. For 1996, I chose The Rock, Nicolas Cage, Sean Connery, about holding hostages on Alcatraz, another great film. I wish I'd seen this in the theater, but never got around to it. This one, however, this honorable mention for the same year, Twister, I did see this in the theater, and it was another one of those fun films that just kind of sticks with you for many years. You remember the experience of the first time you see movies like this in the theater. Okay, moving on to 1997, I chose The Fifth Element for the year. This is another top 10 all-time favorite movie of mine, and I never get tired of watching it. So yeah, The Fifth Element, great stuff. The problem with 1997, though, is that, again, great year with some really good films. And so it sucks that I had to choose between Event Horizon and The Fifth Element. So I'm really not. I mean, I chose The Fifth Element, but this was damn close. I was really torn on this because Event Horizon is one of my all-time favorite sci-fi horror movies, next to Alien, right? So yeah, it was tough that it came out the same year. But Event Horizon gets an honorable mention, as does my favorite Quentin Tarantino film of all time, Jackie Brown. Boy, I hear this might be coming to 4K pretty soon. I'm very excited about that. So yeah, Event Horizon and Jackie Brown get the honorable mentions for 1997. So let's move on. 1998, I chose Enemy of the State. You guys know what a big Tony Scott fan I am. I've talked about him quite a bit so far on this channel. So yeah, that was my choice for 1998. No honorable mentions there. That was my clear choice there. Um, Same thing with 1999. I didn't have any honorable mentions. It was always going to be The Matrix for me, right? I just absolutely love this film. It's up there in my all-time favorites as well. So The Matrix for 1999. And that wraps up the 90s. So moving on to the 2000s, let's start with the year 2000. And that was a big year for me in terms of films. This film came out, Almost Famous, and this is my choice for the year 2000. This is a really, really important and personal film to me. It just really hit really hard. I was going through a particularly rough time in my life when this film came out. And it meant a lot to me. I related to it. I just felt this strong, strong connection to this film. I did mention before, another Cameron Crowe film. I love Cameron Crowe's stuff. I'm not normally a big slice of life kind of guy and those types of movies, but when Cameron Crowe does it, you just can't go wrong. It's solid gold. So yeah, this has always meant a lot to me and been an important film to me. Almost Famous. And by the way, if you've never seen this film, I highly recommend watching the extended bootleg cut or whatever it's called, which also comes on 4K disc inside this package. It is about, what is it, about 30 or 40 minutes longer than the theatrical version. And it is, as far as I'm concerned, the only way to watch this film. You get so much more depth and context with the story in the extended version. So yeah, check it out. Let's see, do I have no honorable mentions for that particular year? Next up is 2001, and that would be Training Day is what got my attention there, right? Best film of the year for me, Training Day. Although there is an honorable mention, and that would be the score. One of my all-time favorite heist flicks. So this came out the same year, and it's just an excellent film. Moving on to 2002, I chose The Bourne Identity as my top choice for the year. Although admittedly, this was a little bit tricky because that was also the same year that Sam Raimi came out with his Spider-Man movie. And Sam Raimi's Spider-Man was kind of a game changer for me. I was going through a period of time in my life where I really wasn't paying attention to like superhero films. I'd never seen the Michael Keaton Batman films or the ones that came after that. And I had it in my mind that superhero stuff was just for kids. You know, I didn't think that it was something that would appeal to a lot of adults. And then I saw this film and I realized how far superhero movies, live action superhero movies had come. And it totally changed the game for me. Spider-Man 1 and the Christopher Nolan movies really changed my thinking on the superhero live action film. So I love this film. It's a great film and definitely worth the honorable mention here. Moving on to 2003, I actually chose SWAT. I love this movie. This is one of those ones that I can watch over and over again and never really get sick of. I get a kick out of it. So even though I wouldn't have thought of this as a movie that would be like my favorite for the year, when we get into the 2000s, there's not as much stuff coming out that I was into. So yeah, this is the one that did it for me. However, there is an honorable mention, and that would be The Italian Job on 4K. As I've said before, I'm a big heist flick fan, so this one really did it for me when it came out. So that would be my honorable mention there. Okay, let's see what else we got here. For 2004, I chose Man on Fire. Again, another Tony Scott film. This should come as no surprise to anybody that's been following my channel recently. Love this film. However, there is an honorable mention here for 2004, and that is Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead. I personally believe this to be one of the greatest horror remakes we've ever seen. I absolutely love this, and of course the 4K looks ridiculously good on this. So, but yeah, Zack Snyder, this is what really put Zack Snyder on my radar big time. I've always loved this remake. Moving on to 2005, just as Sam Raimi's Spider-Man was a big game changer for me personally in terms of my perception of the live-action superhero genre, so was Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins. This one even more so than Spider-Man. This one totally hooked me on the superhero genre for a number of years until I finally got burned out on it in the last few years. But you got to love Batman Begins, the film that started it all for Christopher Nolan. I've always been a big fan of this film, and in many ways, I like it more than, well, I like it definitely more than the third one. Um, as for Dark Knight, that's a tough one because of Heath Ledger, but I've always thought this was a better film than a lot of people give it credit for. And I just love the darker, more serious tone and approach to the live action superhero genre, and that's why this connected so much with me. So, yeah, so Batman Begins for 2005. No honorable mentions for that particular year. Once again, for 2006, I chose a Tony Scott film, and that is, of course, Deja Vu. It should be no surprise to anyone who's been following the channel, given my love of Tony Scott movies. So yeah, Deja Vu was the top choice for 2006. But there are a couple honorable mentions. Michael Douglas and Kiefer Sutherland in The Sentinel also came out in 2006. I also want to mention the Richard Donner directed 16 Blocks with Bruce Willis. This is a great film, and I think it's even a little bit underrated. Yeah, so if you've never seen it, check it out, especially if you're a Richard Donner fan. So, moving on to 2007, I chose, now this, I'm kind of cheating a little bit with this one, but I think I can get away with this. I chose Grindhouse, the double feature with Planet Terror from Robert Rodriguez and of course Death Proof from Quentin Tarantino. Now I love Death Proof. It's like my third favorite Tarantino film. But really what I like is the whole package with this Grindhouse deal. You know, you get both movies together, you get the mock film trailers in between and the intermission and whatnot. I just think it's hilarious, and I've always enjoyed the original Grindhouse double feature presentation with these two films. So yeah, that's my choice for 2007. No honorable mentions for that. That was the clear winner for that year. Moving on to 2008, of course, I had to choose The Dark Knight. I mean, how could you not, right? This film was amazing. And of course, do we need to say anything more about Heath Ledger's performance here? I think not. I do have an honorable mention for 2008, and that is Taken, Liam Neeson. You know, great action film, right? Moving on to 2009, there was only one choice again, the great James Cameron. And Avatar, of course, right? You can't go wrong with Avatar. This was a groundbreaking film when it came out. So I don't see how you could choose anything but Avatar for 2009. And now we're entering the final stretch, the 210s to present day, starting off with the year 2010, another favorite heist flick of mine, and that is The Town. Always loved this film. I think it's the best thing that Ben Affleck's directed, and it's just one of his best films in general, in my view. So yeah, The Town gets my pick for 2010. However, there is of course an honorable mention. Any year that a Tony Scott film came out, you know I'm going to talk about it, right? So Unstoppable, Tony Scott's final film. It was a tough call between these two films for me, between The Town and this one, but I really love this film, and I'm just such a huge Tony Scott fan that I had to at least mention it. Okay, moving on to 2011, we have Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Absolutely love this film. Another one I saw in theaters when it first came out. I believe my wife and I it was like an anniversary date. It might have been our first wedding anniversary, actually. And our date night was to go see Rise of the Planet of the Apes, and we both loved it. So this is a great film. I still like this one more than the other two that came out after. I still think this is the best one of the trilogy. But yeah, this is a powerful, impactful film here. So yeah, Rise of the Planet of the Apes. No honorable mention for 2011. And moving on to 2012, I chose Looper. Bruce Willis, Emily Blunt, Joseph Gordon-Levitt did an amazing job with the role here. He was playing a younger version of Bruce Willis's character. And I swear, he's got Bruce Willis's mannerisms down pat. He just did an incredible job mimicking Bruce. And you actually do believe that he is a younger version of Bruce Willis's character. He's very convincing. So this was a great film. A quick honorable mention here for this year. I also wanted to mention Prometheus. Prometheus was a big deal for me personally because it marked Ridley Scott's return uh, to sci-fi after many, many years away, and I was super excited about it. And I thought it was a good film. I know it got a lot of heat, and not a lot of people didn't like it as much. You know, they're comparing it to the original Alien and all that, but I thought it was a decent film, so I had to at least mention it here. Moving on to 2013, I chose Man of Steel. I'm a huge Zack Snyder fan, like I said before, and I think the Snyderverse Justice League trilogy is amazing. I really was all in on it. So I'm a big fan of Henry Cavill's portrayal of Superman, and I say that as someone who's also a big Christopher Reeve fan. So I thought both guys did an amazing job. This Superman was a little darker, a little edgier, and I really appreciated that. Moving on to 2014, I had to choose Christopher Nolan's Interstellar. Amazing sci-fi film, another film I saw in the theater and was really impressed with it when it came out. So I love this film. There is one honorable mention from the year, and that is, of course, John Wick, the first one. Had to do it. You can't not mention John Wick, right? And I'm a big John Wick fan and Keanu fan. So yeah, that's my honorable mention for 2014. Moving on to 2015, I chose another Ridley Scott film, The Martian. And frankly, next to Alien, this is actually my favorite Ridley Scott film of all time. I love Alien, but I love this film as well. Like I said, I'm a big fan of Ridley when he does sci-fi. For 2016, let's see here. Oh, I'm got a little disorganized here. Bear with me. For 2016, I chose Batman versus Superman, more Zack Snyder action. And of course, the important thing is it's important to have the Ultimate Edition, the full-length, like 3-hour version of this movie, remastered, so you get the shifting aspect ratios and whatnot. That's the version I'm recommending, and the version that I relate to the most. I thought this was really well done. Yeah, I know Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor was probably one of the worst casting decisions ever made. I get that, but I'm a huge fan of Zack Snyder's work with this franchise, regardless of that. So, yeah, Batman v Superman. Of course, for 2017, I had to choose Blade Runner 2049, one of the best sci-fi sequels I think ever. This is a really, really good sequel. It's almost as good, if not as good, as the original Blade Runner film. They really did a good job with this one. So, yeah. For 2018, I chose Mission Impossible Fallout. This is just a great action flick, and I love the shifting aspect ratios. This looks amazing on 4K, by the way. So yeah, Fallout for 2018. And I do have one honorable mention for 2018, and that is Hereditary. Ari Aster. I love this film, and frankly, I think Toni Collette should have gotten an Oscar for this performance. She did an incredible job here. She was just amazing in this. This really caused me to kind of look at Toni Collette in a different way. In terms of as an actor, wow, she's powerful. For 2019, I chose Alita: Battle Angel, Robert Rodriguez and James Cameron. This is such a great film, and I'm really hoping we get a sequel here in the works pretty soon. So, but I really had fun with this one. As for honorable mentions for 2019, I would choose Doctor Sleep. This was a tough call because I love Alita, but this is one of the better horror sequels we've ever seen. This is, of course, a sequel to The Shining, and it's just so well done. I haven't seen the director's cut yet. That's next time I watch these two films, I'm going to actually watch the director's cut. I've only seen the theatrical, but even then, this is an excellent film, a really well done film. Now we're on 2020, which is interesting because I don't have anything for 2020. Nothing. There was no film that spoke to me enough for me to include it on this list. And of course, 2020 was the year that's when COVID hit. So everything got all wonky. So I didn't choose anything for 2020. Which brings us to 2021, completing the Justice League trilogy. Of course, I chose Zack Snyder's Justice League, the 4-hour epic I absolutely love this. I thought it was really well done. I was super psyched when it came out. And yeah, just a great film all the way around. My honorable mention for 2021 would be Dune, of course. This was another really well done film. Uh, I'll admit, this film doesn't resonate with me quite as much as it seems to have with other people, but I did like it and I thought it was really well done. And I thought, I had to at least mention it for 2021. So great film. Uh, and that brings us to 2022. And my choice is Avatar 2, The Way of Water. Of course, big James Cameron fan. I'd been waiting for the Avatar sequel for a long time, so I was very excited that finally came out. I also have an honorable mention for 2022, and that is Michael Bay's Ambulance. I felt like this was a great throwback action flick to like 90s, 80s action. And of course, it's a heist flick, so that's always going to resonate with me big time. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with this one, and it was worth at least mentioning. And that's about it. Those are all my favorite films from every year of my life. These are the films that have meant the most to me, and I thought I'd share them with you. Please don't forget to subscribe if you're enjoying the content and hit the notification bell. Also, don't forget to like the video. I really appreciate your support. Also, feel free to leave me any thoughts or feedback in the comments section below. Let me know what you think of my list. Let me know if you agree with it, if you disagree with anything, and let me know what you'd do differently. I love reading comments and hearing your feedback, positive or negative. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.